This meeting is being recorded.
So it is March of 2023. This is the Nonprofit Executive Leadership Roundtable that Christine Deska and your buddy Tommy DiMisa have been collaborating on for, I guess, 3.5, 4 years now. No, probably more, because we did these in real life, in real time, in real rooms with real people, and now we do them on Zoom. And each month we bring you a subject matter expert, a thought leader in topics that we find to be relevant to our friends in the nonprofit sector. So you can find these videos posted here on YouTube where you found this one. And back to the people in the room now. Let's get real. And we have leaders of nonprofits that come together, and we bring these subject matter experts, as I said. So Christine Deska is here with me, president of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, co-chair of the Queens Chamber of Commerce, where I happen to be sitting right now, the Queens Chamber of Commerce nonprofit committee, and many, many other things. Owns, with her partner Frank, Nonprofit Sector Strategies, and they have a Bells Board product, which is an incredible product that small and medium-sized nonprofits, as well as larger nonprofits, can utilize to manage. I actually have, I think, 3 of my companies that I sit on the board of are in my phone on Bells Board. So I was at an event earlier this week at BoardCon, and I was chatting it up. So excited to have that relationship with Christine and her team. And we'll be introducing soon Greg Lavine and Jake Dilemani from Mercury LLC. So Christine, do you want to take it away and get started?
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to say, I love this group so much. I love that Tommy upgraded his Zoom account in order to be able to post this recording, because we have about 400 folks in our roundtable family now, and we're all so busy and we're all inundated with various virtual commitments. I'm so glad we can capture this expertise that we can bring each and every month. It's a labor of love for us, and we love the relationship building aspect of it, and hearing from each of you what's going on in your organizations and amplifying your messages. It's all about what we do. We have our businesses, but we're just as dedicated to education and sharing information. And this is just so wonderful to gather each month. It's such a feel-good group. It really is a family. And so today we're excited to bring the experts at Mercury, Greg and Jake, into the family. I met Greg a while ago out on the island, and we had some shared political connections in a positive way, I must add. And I'm really excited where he's landed and his work and the expertise that he can share, because there's so much to learn about communications and surveying and polling and all the things that Mercury does. And that's just scratching the surface. So with that said, Greg, I'll turn it over to you to talk a bit about your company, what you do, and to introduce your colleague when you're ready. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Tommy. It's nice to see everybody. A lot of new faces for me, a few folks that I do know. And thank you to the roundtable for hosting us today. It's really very important, I think, conversation, but also just getting to know everybody and learn and what I've been learning about your organizations prior to the discussion here. I will say, Tommy and Christine, and obviously need no introduction to your own group, but I've truly valued our friendship and relationship over the years. It seems that every sort of piece that's touching upon nonprofit and oftentimes industry related, it's either of course there's a shared LinkedIn connection with the two of you, or someone will say, oh, do you know, and now to the point where, do you know Christine? Yes, I know Christine. Or do you know Tom? Yes, of course I know Tom. So these I think that it's very warming to hear that and just know your reach, both from the nonprofit end and into the business world, Long Island and the city. So thank you again. I will briefly introduce myself, Mercury, and then I'm going to turn it to my colleague Jake Dilemani, partner at Mercury, to discuss further our surveys and polling. But so what is Mercury Public Affairs? This is a good question. Mercury Public Affairs, the best way to think about who we are and what we do is that we do really three key areas. We work within communications, so that can be strategic, crisis, digital communications. That's one bucket, so to speak. We work within government relations and lobbying. That's another bucket. And then we also work in the political sphere on political campaigns. We are a bipartisan firm. Within those three key areas, surveying and research and polling can really cut across all three. They can be utilized in the political world, they can be utilized in the corporate world, the business world, and they definitely have a lot of value within the nonprofit world as well. Mercury was started in 2000, so 23 years old. It is we are based here in New York. Our office is downtown in Soho and Houston and Varick, but Mercury is nationwide and international. We're in Washington, Florida, and the Midwest. And it's Mercury is really made up of folks. Obviously, like myself and Jake, we're made up of folks who are former elected officials, former business leaders, a lot of former journalists, as well as folks within the media world. So it's a very interesting cross section, both from backgrounds as well as from on the political spectrum. Myself, and then I will stop and return it to Jake. Myself, I've been working in politics and government for 20 plus years, getting my start in a little state called Delaware, working for a senator then named Joe Biden in the late 90s, which was very, very interesting. Side note, I always say that if you meet folks from the little state of Delaware, which is about 800,000 people that brag that they know Joe Biden, be a little skeptical. Small state, one congressional district, fantastic place to learn government and politics. I worked there for the governor, and I then served in the state legislature there, grew up in New York on Long Island, came back to New York to do a lot of political work on Long Island and Queens, where Jake and I have been working together for over a decade. I've spent some time both doing international work as well as national, local, and within the city council, and then for Congresswoman Grace Meng. And I've been at Mercury for about 4.5 years, working on across those spectrums of industry that I had mentioned. So I will pause there. I don't know how, if you want to, if I can turn it to Jake, or are there any questions? I don't know how you want to.
Are you going to Jake? Yeah, let's go to Jake.
Okay, sure. And if you start hearing some drilling outside, I apologize. I'm 15 stories in the air, but I don't know what happened this morning. The NYPD and the sanitation department and the FDNY all decided to have a fiesta on my block. So if you hear that, I'm probably gonna be muting myself every now and then. Thank you all for having me. Thanks, Greg, for the intro. And Greg, we've been working together for 15 years, not 10. So I hate to break it to you.
It's not even 9 o'clock and I messed up. All right.
Yeah, that's okay. I've done it already myself. So yeah, I don't really have anything to add in terms of Mercury. Greg really laid it out very well. We're a full service public affairs firm, multiple geographies, multiple practice areas. I myself am a partner in the New York City office. One of the areas I oversee is a broad term called public affairs, right? Which is kind of the catch-all for government relations, communications, certainly survey research, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it's kind of bringing all these things together to work for our clients, whether it's a corporation or it's a nonprofit or if it's a foundation or an issue advocacy effort, et cetera. So I'll just dive a little bit by myself and I'll dive right into the survey research. As I said, I'm a part in the New York office. I've been at Mercury for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was at another communications firm for another 6 years or so. Prior to that, I was basically bopping around campaigns. My background is in Democratic campaign work, and specifically within paid media known as advertising, and also survey research. My clientele kind of reflects the diversity of the firm's clientele. I have corporate clients, nonprofit clients, labor unions, political candidates, high net worth individuals, you name it, we have it. And that's also the same for our survey research work. And I'll get into a little bit of why that is. And I know, Tommy, I think you mentioned this will be a conversational format, which is great for me. That's totally, I have a little bit of a PowerPoint slide, but to be very honest, it's just a distillation of that one-page document that was sent, and I don't know that. I mean, I can send it around the group after the fact. I don't know that we need to actually look at it right now. But so survey research and polling, right? Everyone's probably heard of polling, right? And usually in the context of a presidential campaign or something like that, right? Polling and survey research, and I'll use the term survey research as a catch-all, can be used for a whole variety of reasons, for a whole variety of organizations. It's not just to ascertain what the horse race is and the race for governor or president, right? What you're usually trying to do with survey research is find out what messages and what audiences connect to what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? So if you're a company, so I'll give you an example, right? Airbnb, they're a client of ours, and I just came out of the field with a survey for them in Texas, and they're trying to figure out certain attitudes in the electorate about short-term rentals, right? That is their business. They want to know, where are people on short-term rentals? What do they think about it? How does that affect their business, et cetera, right? On the other hand, we have environmental nonprofits, and they want to know, it's not a business, right? But they want to know, what are the attitudes in the local area about a certain environmental issue? How do they then message it to affect an outcome they want from government, right? So it's very diverse. But the point is, you have an organization, you usually have a goal, right? If you're a nonprofit, you have a goal. Maybe it's a program you want to roll out. Maybe you're trying to convince government to fund something. Maybe you're trying to convince government to pass legislation. Maybe you're just trying to message to the population at large about who you are as an organization. Well, you want to use the best data you have, because what you don't want to do is say, well, I think we should be talking about XYZ. You then spend a bunch of resources to talk about XYZ, and you find out after the fact that no one cares about XYZ. And you've just spent money talking about something that's not necessarily the most salient topic. So what survey research does is says, okay, let's test a bunch of messages. Let's see who these messages resonate with best, right? And let's communicate those best messages. So if you're going to spend, let's say, I don't know, $100,000 on some sort of effort to promote something, right? My recommendation would always be spend, I'm just throwing these numbers out because the cost of survey research varies widely and depends on a bunch of different factors. But instead of spending $100,000 with no research to inform what it is that you're going to be communicating, spend $85,000, but communicate a message you know is going to resonate with the target audience, right? And then depending on what it is you're polling and how you're polling and conducting the research, you'll find information that you can use to inform, your earned media strategies, meaning, what kind of stories you want to pitch to the press, what type of validators you should use because they're sympathetic figures. And then also any advertising strategy, paid media strategy, right? Again, if you're going to be expending resources, and resources are always precious, you want to make sure that you're using them as best possible. And also you'll have to, justify it to your donors and your board, et cetera. They're going to want to know, right, that the money is being put to the best use. That is a very top line overview of survey research, but the key point here is that it can be used in a variety of different areas. It's not just big political campaigns. We've done it for small businesses, small and medium-sized nonprofit organizations, and there's a bunch of different ways to do polling. I mean, polling can be very expensive. It can also be quite affordable depending on how you do it. So that's a top line overview, and I'll stop there, and Tommy or Christine, let you take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Jake. That was really helpful. I think there's just so many areas where Mercury intersects that I didn't even really realize until I just heard your overview and Greg's introduction as well. I'm just wondering, do you all intersect with capital campaigns as well? We work with a lot of organizations that are really trying to feel out their donor attitudes and views on things. And I know that fundraising is always, of course, a top need for our group. I just wondered if do you want to comment on how you all might kind of work in terms of a fundraising effort or some of the components of fundraising strategy as well?
Sure. So within the context of survey research or just generally?
I would say both. I think anything is helpful to know and
Sure.
give our folks ideas on how to plant better seeds, how to get more attention, build awareness, any of the things that
Sure.
I think you touch
Sure.
on.
So sure. So the short answer is yes. So depending on the scope of the capital campaign, we've certainly done a lot of work with folks to help them craft their message. So they're going out there and using the best stuff to get dollars in the door. So if it is a smaller universe of people we are trying to, from which we're trying to ascertain what their opinions and values and beliefs are, we conduct focus groups. We're doing one right now, actually, for it's a city in the state of New York. The government retained us to run a recruitment and retention campaign for them. Part of that was we have to find out attitudes of prospective employees and current employees, right? Why do you work for this city? What do you not like about the city? What do you like about the city? So we're running focus groups there. So if let's say it's a foundation that has a very small target number of people, but they're very important to the livelihood of the organization, we can create focus groups, do some small scale research to find out what their attitudes are. If you're talking about a much larger capital raise, say you're sending out direct mail to, let's say it's the animal rights group, right? You have a list of people who you know or believe are interested in animal rights issues, and you're sending out mailers, maybe digital advertising. We're actually right now doing something in Arizona for a nonprofit that focuses on child abuse cases, right? And provides legal resources, et cetera, for children and foster parents, et cetera. And we're running a digital effort there to help them raise money. Part of that digital effort is a research component, which is we're doing a lot of A/B testing. We test which messages resonate best. And actually, we're in part 2 of it. In part 1, which happened in December of last year, there was very clear information after a few weeks, which was we knew what the message was that worked best and drove donations. So, but to back up a little bit, if we're talking about a larger capital raise campaign, you could certainly field a survey, and we've definitely done this many, many times, where we're testing attitudes of certain populations to then inform the message. So then when you do solicit those people for donations, you're using the language that is most likely to have an impact on their ability to give, or propensity to give, I should say.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. I think especially with the strategic planning work that we do, we often start with, how is your organization perceived? Like, let's make sure you know how you're perceived among your many audiences, your many targets and segments. And I really like the idea of the focus group approach. I think a lot of the organizations that are part of our roundtable family have a sort of core group of donors. Do you have any ideas or suggestions for folks who might not have been able to take the temperature of their donor group recently, or how they could approach that sort of conversation? I'm wondering. And at the same time, I wanted to reflect on where you said initially about setting a goal. I think oftentimes capacity is such an issue for nonprofits, right? We're all so stretched that it's hard to take a step back and really identify the goal that you're striving towards. And it sounds like that is a key component that you might meet with clients first to solidify and identify, what are you really aiming for here with this new program? Where are you really headed? And I think that can be a struggle for organizations who don't have an active strategic plan, or are really kind of treading water and keeping their organizations going. So I just wondered if you could speak to that kind of goal setting component, and then also just the focus group side of it in terms of a key donor group that might be helpful.
Sure. So I'll take it from the second one backwards. So as far as setting goals are concerned, our approach, Mercury's approach to almost everything we do, whether it's survey research or it's a communications campaign, certainly a political effort, we always want to work backward from the goal. So it's very important to define a goal, because if you don't have a goal, you could have a bunch of people with conflicting priorities potentially. You're going to spend resources, you're going to spend a lot of time, and no one's really going to know where you're headed. Right. So it's very important to identify a goal, and that goal may change as an effort progresses. That's natural, but you need to identify the goal so you can create a plan and work backward from that. Right. And that's not just the work plan, that's also the budget, et cetera. So that's very important to us in any engagement that we we work in. As far as setting a message that resonates, right, and basically having that research, let's say a small focus group set up, and you get research in terms of finding out attitudes of a small group of these donors. One of the reasons that's really important also is because there's a lot of stuff happening in the world, right? Like everyone is competing with one another for a limited amount of money, for limited attention, limited news coverage, right? It's very competitive out there, and you're competing with everything, not just another nonprofit necessarily, but just everything happening. What's happening in the news that day? What are the consumer products someone's focusing on? The family life, everything else, right? So you have to make sure, right, if you are trying to get money in the door, especially, right, because people do not typically like to part with that. If you're trying to get money in the door, you have to have a very, very salient, easy to understand, clear and concise message. And that's why we believe engaging in research is very, very important. It's usually these small investments, you know, early on, either when an organization is being formed or when a new initiative is being rolled out, such as a capital campaign. Use some resources to get that data in the door, and it's going to make your work product that much more effective down the road. And it's going to wind up most likely saving the organization money down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so interesting to be able to clearly kind of see among a listing of initiatives which ones resonate with donors, because you can make your fundraising asks so much more effective once you know that. And oftentimes it's never taking away from your mission. It's just simply tailoring the message in a way that is going to result in more dollars and focusing on the issues that are more attractive for whatever reason, and how to convey them as well. The jargon issue always comes up, I think, once we really get into the weeds of different missions. I was wondering, when you think about the key elements of an effective poll or survey, where do you all start with that? I think many of the organizations on today, anyone's engaged in formal polling before or gone down this road. So it might be interesting to hear how you start, or some kind of best practices to consider when developing this sort of outreach.
Sure. Yeah, it's gonna differ for everyone because it depends on what you're trying to test and the sample population at hand. Sounds like there's a train outside, and I live on the Upper East Side, so I don't even know where that's coming from. Sorry.
We can't hear much, don't worry, Jake. Okay. And we're all, I mean, you never know what's going to happen out here in Astoria either, believe me.
Okay, thank you. So it's gonna vary based on the survey, the client, et cetera, right? There are traditional phone surveys where you have a call center, and you know, you get a phone call, you pick up the phone, it's a live human being. A lot of that type of work is now being supplemented by texting or email surveys, right? So you'll get a text message with a link to click through to an online. And the reason that that's being used more and more is frankly because fewer and fewer people every year are picking up the phone, right? I'm sure you all pick up your phone with far less than you used to when it's a number you don't recognize. So it's going to depend on a variety of factors. The process that we go through with our clients is we'll have a conversation about what is the goal? What are we trying to figure out here, right? We're trying to move the needle, but what does that look like? What does success look like? Probably have another 1 or 2 conversations to gather whatever data or information we need from the client. We'll do our own independent research to see what we have. That informs how we draft the survey, right? And the survey, again, it's gonna, and I don't mean to be vague, it really is very circumstantial, is going to it's going to include the list of questions that are clear and concise in a short amount of time that try and get us the information we need to then inform whatever it is that the client needs to get done. There's no one type of question that's in every survey necessarily. It is very, it's a little all over the board, again, depending on the methodology and the type of survey and the goal.
I mean, when it comes to texting, that's interesting that you said that, because are you finding it's getting harder and harder to get a a strong survey response now with our limited attention spans and just the constant clutter of information you were referencing earlier? And is that why you're finding success with the texting approach? Is it kind of chunking out the information or the questions in a different way? Can you talk more about that? Because I think nonprofits are, I've talked to many organizations that are evaluating certain text to pledge funders, but vendors, text to pledge vendors, but those vendors are also offering other options like surveying and different kind of ways to get take the pulse of their audience. How do you find that that's kind of shifting, or is it shifting in your industry?
Yeah, it is shifting. It's a good question. The reason it's shifting again is because people are just less likely to pick up their phones now. People view phone calls, unfortunately, I would say they view them more invasive than they do a text message, right? Unless you're being spammed all day on your phone. A text message, you can pop it up, you can ignore it or not, but you know exactly what it is, right? You don't have to go through the for some people, the agony of a phone conversation. Now, traditional phone polling still, it's very, very effective. It's a good method of survey research. It produces good results as long as the rest of the methodology passes muster. But that's really just what it is. It's fewer people are now picking up the phones, and you have to reach people somehow. And everyone basically has a smartphone these days, right? So you send a text. Usually, sometimes it's an in-text survey. Those cannot get that in depth because no one wants to sit there and read 17 paragraphs on their iPhone in a text message. Shorter surveys can be in the text itself. Some of the longer surveys will usually have a link in the text, and the link will bring you to a website, and then you can do the survey there, or you'll get an email. It just fewer people are picking up the phone, and you got to reach people somehow. And right now, for every one person who picks up their phone and answers, let's say a 20-minute survey on the phone, I'm not exaggerating. It is thousands of people that need to be called before that one person picks up the phone. Yeah.
That's what I was imagining, it being very resource intensive to sort of go down that path and trying to think about the most cost effective ways to approach this sort of surveying. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yes, a traditional phone survey can be very expensive, and there are cheaper ways to do it. You can engage in automated surveys. You can do a smaller sample text-based only survey, for instance. There's a whole lot of services that we provide to clients who don't have maybe the budget to do a $50,000 a phone survey that surveys everyone in the city of New York, for instance, right? Or samples the city of New York. But also the how expensive, or I should say affordable, traditional phone polling is also based on who you're sampling. So if you're doing a national survey, well, there's a lot of people in the United States of America, right? And if you want to get your 1,500 responses, that's not difficult. It's much more difficult to get, let's say, 500 responses in Nassau County, right, than it is 1,500 responses national. That's obvious, right? And that will sometimes affect the cost, because if the incidence rate is low, you have to call more people. To your point, that is resource intensive. But even Nassau County, and that was probably not a great example because Nassau County is a large county, a big enough population. We do polling in Nassau County all the time, and getting 500 samples not, but it's just relative to like the United States of America, it's a more difficult endeavor.
It's so interesting. You probably have so many kind of hard data numbers in your head, based on the different geographic areas that you're working in. Beth, I'm glad to see your hand up. We have a question, and I want to encourage others, if you're thinking about your organization and something, a goal that you have, or a place where you're looking to make progress, and you think that surveying, polling, communications is something that could help, please don't hesitate to ask a question in the chat, and then we can go to you and have you ask your question to Jake while he's on. So Beth, what is your question?
I'm sorry I didn't text it. It seems too much for me to write it in the chat. I also serve as president of my synagogue, and this topic is valuable for any nonprofit. So I love the idea of text messaging, and I'm glad you delved a little bit deeper into that, Christine. So my question is, before you send a text message survey, do you send a text message that says, tomorrow we're going to be sending you a survey, or, you know, I'm not trying to be specific, but the religious school at North Shore Synagogue has some questions about how you manage your students here. Stay tuned for a survey. Is that how you approach it, or do you just push it out?
Yeah, it can be that way. It can also just be in real time. You get a text message, and you know, sometimes we incentivize that. So maybe there's like a $5 gift card in it for you, right, to give you a reason to answer the survey. So it really just depends on the population we're trying to sample, what the client wants, what we think, what Mercury thinks makes the most sense in terms of the methodology. But it could be either or there. And one other thing to consider is, you know, if you're really, you know, if you were trying to conduct let's say a focus group of a small number of people, that's one thing. If you're trying to ascertain the attitudes of, you know, voters in Nassau County, that's another thing. And that at that point, you have to take considerations into account, like having a representative sample, right? So you want to be able to model properly so the responses you get represent, right, that sample population at large, right? So in the case of, let's say, your synagogue, small number of people relative to the size of Nassau County, obviously small number of people, right? Getting a representative sample there may not be the most critical thing. I don't know how many people attend your synagogue, but let's just say it's a couple hundred people, right? You know, that is less concern about that, and that is more what is the best way just to reach them to get the responses. So if it happens to be tomorrow, you're going to be getting the survey, you know, then that's fine. We do it whichever way works for the client without sacrificing the integrity of the instrument.
Thanks.
Great question, Beth. Do you have a follow-up? No. Okay. Thanks for the question. I think that's something a lot of us can relate to, because we're trying to figure out, based on who we're serving, what are their thoughts and feelings in terms of where the organization is going. And I think when it comes to social return on investment, which is something I talk about often, a huge challenge is after someone goes through a program or service that we might offer, how are they impacted for the better going forward, or what are their future challenges? And I think that the challenge that I hear often, Jake, is how can I get more people to respond to my surveys? So I wondered, could you speak to incentives that you've seen work very well? You mentioned the $5 gift card or different things. It seems to be a real challenge with these smaller populations that a lot of nonprofits are reaching out to really be able to hear, you know, okay, I went through this program and now I'm, you know, just simply asking, are you gainfully employed now? Have you completed college? And because funding ends and then it's hard to kind of keep tabs and data points going. It's a real struggle. So any incentives that you found that work particularly well that you could share with us?
Sure. I'll preface it with the overwhelming majority of our survey work, 90+% of it, we never have to offer incentives to our respondents. While fewer people are picking up the phone than they did even just 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, there's still enough people out there that pick up the phone and answer surveys. I mean, there wouldn't really be a polling industry if that were the case, right? So there's still enough people out there that you can conduct all this work without having to necessarily incentivize people. That said, particularly if we're looking at either a small population where we really need people to respond, or a very hard to reach population, which could be in immigrant communities, very low income communities. You know, there's certain types of demographics where it's very hard to reach these people, and it's even harder once you reach them to get them to finish a survey. So in those cases, incentives do help, and it could be something along the lines of a $5, $10 gift card. I mean, just technologically, it's easy to do that because you can do that all electronically. You know, they can get the code for the card that way, and it's an open-ended incentive, meaning they can use the Target gift card for $5 on anything they want to target. It's not specific, you know, you get some benefit that you can only use, let's say, in this one location at this one time. So my advice would be, if you have to use incentives, you don't have to spend a ton of money to do it. Even a small amount, $5, $10 will usually help. But keep it open-ended. Let it be something that the respondent can use on multiple in multiple ways.
Makes sense. Something that's easy to actually utilize and benefit from.
And Christine, I just wanted to, I'm sorry. I just wanted to just mention one thing that was just touched upon a little while ago, not to interfere with any questions. And one of the other key components that we've seen within survey research, especially within nonprofits, is helping with board direction, because there's always especially organizations that may have been around for a long time. There's always very differing opinions, and not necessarily right or wrong opinions, but based on, you know, subjective and experience of where's this organization going, how does this message actually meet it. There's a lot of clarification that surveys can do within utilizing that data to give that board direction, which then extends into specifically into what's that message for donors. So I know we touched upon it, but we, you know, that data set sort of takes away some of the subjectivity.
That is so helpful to know, Greg. I think so many of us are trying to get our board members more engaged and find, you know, more thoughtful ways to interact with our board members. And it sounds like this is a very specific area that you all could help organizations with. So you specifically will craft kind of a way to engage with a board of directors to kind of ascertain their overall views on different.
Yeah, there's ways to obviously to both utilize how that survey is being, especially the language of the survey being put into the field to reflect maybe some of the concerns of the board members, to be able to gather that before. I've seen that. It's a little bit of a larger sort of collaboration to kind of understand where ideas are, but what's coming back can be reflected to help in the presentation, the polling presentation, to help clarify some concerns, validate, invalidate others, but that can stem to help give direction to both where organizations are placing media, as well as how they're relating to their donors, because there's always, obviously, you know, there's always those conversations at the board level of where's the organization going and things of that sort.
Great. And so before we shift to talk a little bit about advocacy and lobbying work, I don't know how many organizations on the call today engage in lobbying, but there's certainly a lot of education happening in the advocacy space that we're all a part of, whether we know it or not oftentimes. Before we talk about that piece, I just wondered if Jake or Greg, if you could share with us, I don't know, have there been any cool insights that have come out of working with nonprofit organizations from a survey or poll that you've done that have really kind of shifted the path, or just confirmed that they were on the right path in terms of their outreach or programming or what have you? I think that's helpful for us to kind of all think more about how are we interacting with our various audiences. I like how you said initially, Greg, you know, what audience connects with whatever message. Are they connecting, or are we starting to lose folks as all of the, you know, things are shifting in the larger news space, right? Are we staying kind of on with a message that's truly going to resonate? Can you speak to some of the organizations that you've worked with? Not specifically, but I find it interesting to know, like, when the opinions change and it really, or stay the same, and just being able to know, you know, that we're on the right path.
Sure. Yeah, that happens all the time. So, but sometimes people's opinions, their gut instincts are confirmed by the data. So that also happens. And then people feel really smart when they see that. But yeah, all the time we'll field research studies, and it'll come back and it'll change the direction or the message, or sometimes even frankly the goal of an organization. I'm hesitant to get into any specifics on behalf of clients, but I'll give a I'll give an example without naming the client. So this was a few years back. It's a very, very, very well-known nonprofit organization, national organization, focuses on children. And we conducted a survey research effort for them, basically to figure out what their marketing campaign should be moving forward, what their branding needed to be. And it came back and it gave us some insights that were a little bit interesting, because some of the stuff 100% confirmed what everyone on the client side thought was going to be the case. Okay, that's good. You want confirmation. There were also some data points in that survey that came back and totally surprised people, right? Some things they thought were no-brainers turned out not to be, the case. And some things they thought didn't matter wound up mattering. Those findings then informed what was a multi-million-dollar rebranding effort and a rollout that included, TV commercials and digital advertisements and all this type of stuff. And it was for some very massive effort, and all that stuff came from one national survey that we did that gave them the data to inform that effort. So that was a very big example, but it happens all the time. And you have to have people who are open to changing their minds when they have data in front of them. And some people are very, open-minded about that, and some people not so much. But that happens more often than not.
It's so interesting. So I wanted to ask you more questions, but I don't want you to reveal too much. So let's talk a bit about advocacy and lobbying for a moment then. So tell us how Mercury helps with advocacy efforts. And I don't know, Greg, you've lived and breathed this your whole career, obviously, probably even before you had a proper job. So where does Mercury come in terms of helping nonprofits in the advocacy space and influencing elected officials? How do you all get involved? And what recommendations would you offer just in general, because you have so much expertise in this realm? I think smaller nonprofits often may not know where to enter. And it can also create anxiety around, okay, we're not a C4, so we shouldn't be lobbying, but where is that line between education and lobbying? Because we all have a role to play in activism, I think, and it's just a matter of, being aware of what we can and cannot do and where to raise our voices most effectively.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That's a good question. So, Mercury works with nonprofits, large, medium, small, in the advocacy space. That could mean a few things. It could mean direct lobbying, where a client is working with us and hiring us, and they specifically are interested in maybe a bill, a piece of legislation in Albany, in the city, either that will benefit or could be oftentimes something that's maybe harmful to their organization. We will work with individual organizations as well. On that, oftentimes we do work with maybe there's associations, obviously, of different organizations where there's a common goal trying to be reached. So that could be, again, this is specifically legislative, so it could be a legislative issue. It could also be a funding issue. So we do a lot of work, especially within the city of New York, but outside as well, with organizations that are looking, either they've got funding before, they're aiming to get funding. It may be, for just an example, maybe citywide. Let's say it's in the New York City. It could be citywide funding. It could be funding that comes from borough presidents. They have their own budgets, from city council members who have their own budgets. And then within Albany, obviously, budgets, which is really happening now, legislatively has to be passed by April 1st, is a matter of making sure that clients can have access to those legislators, as well as figuring out how they can get their programming within the budget. So that's one piece of it. There's also advocacy on sort of the non-lobbying end, and that can be on the communications end. A lot of that can kind of bleed into what we're talking about here in surveys. But within the within the advocacy end, it could be on the, for instance, nonprofit we work with, Tommy knows well, and this is we do a lot of communications work for the Scott Beagle Memorial Fund here there on Long Island, but they're also national. A lot of it is being able to tell the stories of those organizations. Yes, to large media, and that can be a value, but there's also, for instance, of the organization I mentioned, there's a lot of work that's done by organizations that those stories can sometimes better be told on a local sense and local media that may not have been told, or maybe they were told a while ago, and it's just not, that piece of the program is not as relevant. So we do work, we work on that. And the other part of that, and this goes actually, Beth, I think to your question earlier before when we were chatting, is that how on the strategic end, on the communications end, how do we sustain that? So it's the days of just getting a great article somewhere in the page whatever, and then it's gone. You can keep utilizing that. You can utilize that for your donor base. You can utilize that for your activists. Utilize it for your volunteers. And how do you plug that in, both from thinking about that from a digital end and a social media end to to a content end. So those are two spaces that we do a lot of work in thinking about nonprofits, and we also obviously will partner with other folks that are maybe working more directly within the fundraising space of organizations that are doing some grant writing and things of that nature to kind of bring both of those thoughts together. We've had, and then I'll stop. We often find it very valuable that the press that you're getting, the media that you're getting, can be utilized in that one pager when you're trying to go out to, especially on the private end for grants. Kind of housing all of that stuff that you have makes it much more attractive to potential donors.
Thanks so much, Greg. Jake, did you want to add anything to that, or you're letting Greg do all the advocacy and political talk this morning?
I could not have said it better myself, so nothing to add.
Thank you so much, Greg. I know your experience is so vast. There's so many things I could ask you in the advocacy space. I just want to go back to the surveying and feedback piece that we're kind of here to really dig into today. And again, I encourage folks that are listening, if you have a question, just raise your hand or type something into the chat so we see you if you want to ask Jake while he's here with us. When you work with nonprofits in terms of the segmentation side, I know it all stems from the goal that they have. Can you just talk more about how you approach sort of who, I guess it has to start with the goal, but then what are the different segments? And we talked about some of this in terms of board members being a segment perhaps, or the top donors. But what are other segments that you reach out to when it comes to nonprofits, and sort of maybe if you could tell the story of how you've seen attitudes come back that were a surprise or that did confirm a suspicion. I also just wanted to reinforce what you said, which was really important about leadership being open to actually accepting the data that comes back. I think that must be huge for your industry because it all comes back to communications ultimately. So if leadership is not willing to change the messaging based on hard data, then you have an even bigger challenge ahead of you. I'm sure that could be pretty frustrating when it comes to your profession. But could you speak to some of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, we are consultants, so, we can bring a horse to water kind of thing, like we can give you the information and we can strongly recommend something, but at the end of the day, it's up to the client to implement that and to say yes. Right. And usually that happens. Right. Sometimes it takes some cajoling, but usually that happens. As far as what other populations we would potentially survey for a client beyond, let's say, a smaller focus group type effort for board members, depends. So let's say it's a social service nonprofit that provides, I don't know, any number of social service services to key populations, right? We could test those populations, right? to see if they are, if what is being offered matches their needs or expectations, for instance, right? Another population that we would typically survey, and this is actually what we wind up doing a lot of, is let's say that there's a nonprofit organization that is promoting or sometimes opposing some public policy initiative, right? And they want to influence either the local government or their state legislature or Congress, whatever it is. They need to have the proper messaging to know what to say to try and persuade policymakers to do or not do something. And also then to maybe inform any advertising that is broadcast with the attempt of influencing those policymakers. So that winds up being a lot of what we do. And that's a matter of surveying the electorate. Now, you slice it and dice it certain ways depending on what exactly you're trying to find out. Sometimes you would sample just all voters who vote in presidential elections. Sometimes you would sample a smaller group of voters, tighten the screen, and maybe it's people who vote every single election, right? That winds up being a lot of the survey work that we do.
So interesting. I love being able to kind of come away with takeaways, actually, which leads me to one of my last questions.
I'm sorry, actually. One other thing that may be helpful, and I forgot about this, beyond, let's say you're trying to influence policy, and beyond maybe you're trying to ascertain folks in your catchment area, how would they view whatever initiatives you're trying to roll out or whatever. Another basket that we have done surveys in is for employees of companies or nonprofits. So obviously smaller companies, that's more of a focus group, but a very large company, you're talking about thousands of employees, you can survey those people also, and that is to help the client is the company. Usually it's to help them figure out what is their internal communication strategy to these employees, what do they need to change, et cetera. And we ran, this was years ago, an effort on behalf of a client that was targeting drivers, meaning for hire vehicle drivers. And that was an effort that spanned multiple languages. It was in the city of New York. So you're talking about this driver pool is from Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, East Asia, right? A lot of different languages being spoken. So we put together an effort that would enable us to get to these drivers in culturally competent manners. And I believe we did use some incentives for that project. And the goal there was to inform an advocacy campaign around those drivers, right? So that would be a little bit of a mix between an employee type survey and maybe a social services organization reaching out to members of a certain population who may be the end recipients of whatever that organization is doing. That was like a hybrid to a degree. So we've done things like that as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we work with a lot of organizations who are always considering a sort of an employee opinion poll of some kind, and especially with many organizations really digging into DEI work now, the cultural competency piece is always huge, and where could we be doing more? And is there a sense of belonging and trust among our employees? Is always a huge and often uncomfortable subject to broach sometimes, but it's important to have that sort of feedback loop and be consistent with it. We're at 9:44, so we still have a few more minutes. So I'm going to ask Jake one last question, and then if anyone listening has a question they want to ask him in real time, we'll open it up. My last question is just, Jake, if you had, 3 takeaways that you'd like nonprofit leaders to come away with, I'm just wondering what those would be, considering the resource constraints that many of us constantly face. What are the things that should be top of mind when it comes to kind of being in touch with our audiences and segments? What should we be thinking about, to really maximize our social mission? It's all tied together. And I just really appreciate the communications emphasis that you've made. I think everything comes back to communications, and we can never forget that. So I appreciate that. That's really one of your kind of key bucket areas as well.
Sure. So I'd say a few things. One, survey research is more accessible and affordable than people think, right? So don't sit there and think that this is some six-figure expense that only, big corporations or, a big-time political candidates can afford. It's not the truth. Secondly, back to what part of the conversation was earlier, everyone in the universe is competing with everyone else for people's attention, right? So your messages have to be clear and concise, right? And data plays a massive role in that, right? What resonates best with people out there. And then thirdly, and we encounter this all the time, with all types of clients, not just nonprofit clients. But no one in the world is sitting there thinking about your nonprofit as much as you are. So things that you take for granted, you think, oh, everyone must know who we are, or everyone must care about this issue, or everyone must think about this issue the way that we think about this issue, right? Don't fall into that trap, because more often than not, most people don't know who you are, don't think about the issue the way that you do, and maybe would rank, whatever it is you're working on, not as the top 5 priorities. That might be priority number 10, but you're walking around thinking that everyone, and that is a dangerous pattern to fall into, because, you're not communicating properly, and that then will impede your growth and your ability to succeed. So those would be my 3 takeaways, and survey research is a way to really, on items number 2 and 3, really, help you avoid the pitfalls.
Thank you. That is so interesting. I always say, if your communication is A, but by the time it gets to your intended audience, it's somehow B or something other than what you wanted it to be, what good is it doing? We all can learn a little bit from the dreaded New York Post in terms of the simplified way of communicating. I think they are happy to say it's a second grade level, going out to people with a message that will absorb in our brains, because we're all so bombarded with different messages.
Yeah.
And with nonprofits, we hear our missions kind of conveyed sometimes in a way where, even if I have some familiarity with the challenges that people with disabilities face, it's still sort of hard to sometimes really retain what's being said if it's not communicated in a very, very simple way. And it's so hard to kind of take a step back and like you said, not everyone is going to be aware of your work. How can we really have crisp messaging going out? And that all does feed from the testing that you all do. So it's so helpful.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Any questions from our group? We have a quieter group today, I feel like.
I have a question. What is the
Yes.
validity of tools like SurveyMonkey and things that are, I don't know, easy? I always hear people say, well, let's do a SurveyMonkey. Obviously, it's not the same as engaging a firm like yours. But do you ever get any valid data from tools like that?
Yeah. I mean, if done correctly and used in the right context, a tool like SurveyMonkey will give you statistically valid data. And it's a fairly easy to use and fairly affordable method. Yeah, so certainly.
That was a big if, though.
Well, no, I mean, I would say probably, look, if you're a small organization and you are very, very, very cost conscious, and you know how to use the tool, and there's a lot of hands here, and you have the right sample. Yes. And then you have to make sure that your questions are written properly. I mean, that's really, so if you don't have experience writing surveys, you meaning anyone, you're inclined to write questions that may be leading. And if you're genuinely looking for objective responses, you don't want to be asking leading questions. If you are looking for a certain outcome in the responses, then that may not be a concern of yours, but that is usually going to be the biggest the variable. The tool itself, though, is a fine tool for certain cases.
I think I'm going to jump in, and this is my challenge. The questions that we ask and the data that we receive is my biggest challenge. We survey at the end of our programs all the students, then a questionnaire for the professionals, then a questionnaire for the teachers. And on a scale of 1 to 5, if I have all 4s and 5s, then I can say that everybody thought my program was good because it was either good or very good. But the question of, do you, for example, do you think that the information you learned today will have an effect on your future career goals? Is that a big enough question? Is that the right question? It's the questions, and my parallel life with the synagogue and career day, it's the same thing. Are you happy with our religious school program? It's not, I don't know how to ask the bigger question.
You're not gonna get a substantive enough response to give you enough critical feedback. Yeah. So sometimes what we do for clients, if they have small budgets and can't afford some of the more in-depth research methods, what we do is we will write the surveys and then say the client can then go figure out how they're going to get the information, right? It's not necessarily the most scientific method, but if you're sampling, let's say, students, and that shouldn't really be an issue. So we will write the questions, and there's 2 reasons why it helps to have folks who do it for a living do that. 1, they just know how to do it properly, but then 2, they're viewing your issue or issues from a different perspective. We're not in it the way that you are, so we're coming to it with really no preconceived notions on it, no emotions about it, right? And so because we're not in the thick of it, that allows us to usually come up with questions that maybe, or at least the wording thereof, that you maybe had not thought of. So we work with small clients a lot to provide them with services that are more, we'll do a piece of it and then hand it over, and then that client will then finish it.
Did you hear emotion in my request, Jake?
A little bit. A little bit. Emotion and frustrations.
That's a great question, Beth. And I think now you see Jake's email address in the chat. Perhaps you could send him one of your struggling ones and he would respond. And then you could start that relationship and see how it goes.
No, and I'd be happy to, honestly, take a look at stuff if you have it. I mean, because you raise a very good point, which is you can ask, and this can be in any survey, you can ask a question. Clients will, many times after I give them the first draft of the survey, because they need to see it, unless they're just saying, just go do it, I don't want to look at it again. They'll come back with, what about this question? What about that question? And my response to them is always going to be, well, what are you trying to get out of that question? Just asking the question for the sake of the question, and then that information coming back that does nothing, that doesn't help you inform what it is you're doing, is a waste of a question, right? And that usually, in traditional surveys, that means it's more expensive and it's less likely to be answered because you're adding length to the survey. And in the case of, let's say, your students, it's just, why are you even bothering with that question if all you're going to get back is yes, no, right? That's not particularly informative.
Thanks, Jake. That's why it's so hard to get rid of us darn consultants, because we come to the table with different questions and we kind of force a different way of thinking, and it's a thoughtful approach. And it's so hard to do that when you're in the midst of your mission work and it's mission critical, and to take that moment. I just really want to thank Jake and Greg for your time. We know how busy you are. You're out doing a million things. And we appreciate your expertise, and we want to share, your one-pager with the whole Roundtable family and any other resources that you'd like us to do that going forward. And Greg, any last comments from you?
No, we really appreciate everybody's time here today, and Christine and Tommy, again, special thank you for your friendship, your guidance in our discussions, both professionally as well as, you know, from the community sense. And, you know, both of Jake and I are both really happy to be able to be here and have the conversation.
Well,
Likewise, we'll have to bring y'all back. You're doing a lot over there, so we only got to scratch the surface today.
Anytime.
Well,
Tommy, over to you.
yeah, just I echo all the gratitude all the way around. I appreciate what the two gentlemen brought to the table today. Thank you for your expertise, and certainly thank you for the community here, folks who are, you know, no big deal, just changing the world each and every single day on the front lines of nonprofits. I appreciate you all more than you'll ever imagine. And thanks for being here. We will be back the fourth Thursday of each month. So if you want to continue to come and check out some time with us, just stay in touch. I appreciate that. Thanks very much, everybody. Make it a great day.